The wind carried dust, like old secrets that refused to settle. By noon, the sky above Ash Hollow burned white, and the town waited, quiet as a held breath, for something to break it. That something came when a woman stepped out of the old mercantile, a pair of scuffed leather boots in her hands. They were her late husband's, cracked at the heel, stitched with care that had outlived him. Mara Keene didn't speak much anymore. Folks said silence had stuck to her after the fire, the one that took her husband, her barn, and her good name. They'd whispered words like witchcraft and betrayal when the cattle turned up poisoned, when the preacher's son swore he saw her in the smoke, barefoot and praying to no God he knew. Now she was selling his boots for $2, enough to buy a sack of flour and kerosene, maybe, enough to pretend life still wanted her in it. Across the street, the saloon doors groaned. Out stepped a man, broad-shouldered, coat torn at one cuff, his face drawn like it had been carved with a dull knife. His eyes followed her hands, the way she held those boots like they still carried a pulse. He crossed over slow, boots thudding on dry planks. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat, though the gesture seemed reluctant, almost foreign to him. "You sellin' those?" She looked up. Her eyes were river gray, cold, tired, steady. "They were my husband's," she said. The man nodded once, then reached for the boots. When he turned them over, his thumb brushed a faint brand burned into the sole, a mark shaped like a crescent. He knew that mark. Every man who'd fought in the border wars did. He slid one boot on, then the other. They fit too well, like memory trying to come home. He whispered it under his breath, a line only the dust heard. They still fit. Something flickered in Mara's face. Not grief, not yet hope. Something quieter. But when the town marshal stepped out of the sheriff's office, papers in his hand, that flicker died. "Mara Keene," he called. "You're wanted for theft and deceit. You sold the preacher's colt last week, didn't you?" The crowd turned. Boots shifted. Whispers rose. A woman pulled her child close. Mara stood straight, the sunlight sharp on her cheek. "That colt was mine," she said, "born on my land." But no one believed her. Not after the fire. Not after the rumors. The cowboy looked at her again. He saw the rope burn faintly healed on her wrists, the kind left by a mob that didn't quite finish what it started. And something inside him, something he'd buried in the Badlands years ago, began to stir. He took one slow step forward and said, "Marshal, seems to me you're mistaking law for gossip." The marshal squinted. "And who the hell are you?" The man straightened, thumb resting on his gun belt. "Used to be cavalry," he said. "Now I'm just someone who knows a lie when he hears one." The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that decides the shape of a story. Dust spun between them. The preacher's son watched from the porch, hatred curling in his grin. The woman clutched her boots to her chest like armor. And from the edge of the crowd, a child's voice cut through, soft, but trembling with courage. "She didn't steal it. I seen the foal born on her land." Heads turned. The marshal's jaw tightened. The cowboy's gaze met Mara's, and in that gaze, something fragile and wordless passed between two people who had run out of places to hide. The wind rose again, rattling the sign of the gallows down the road, and that's where the story really began. The marshal's voice echoed down Main Street, but by sundown it was the sound of horse hooves that carried farther. Two riders, one woman with a bundle under her arm, one man with the weight of a past on his shoulders, left the town behind, silhouettes fading into red dusk. They didn't speak for miles. The cowboy's horse, an old sorrel named Juniper, moved steady. Mara rode behind him, side saddle, holding what little she owned, a blanket, a photograph burned at one edge, and a half-empty canteen. Behind them, the desert stretched wide and silent. Ahead, the mountains waited like quiet judges. "You didn't have to step in," she said finally. The cowboy kept his eyes on the horizon. "Didn't plan to, but the marshal was about to hang a woman for being unpopular. Figured I'd seen enough of that in my time." "You were Army?" "Once," he said. "Now I'm just trying not to be." They camped by a dry creek bed. The night air bit sharp, and the wind whispered through the cottonwoods like a restless spirit. Mara lit the fire, her hands trembling slightly as she struck the flint. When it caught, the orange light touched her face. Thin, worn, but strong in a way that defied pity. "You got a name?" she asked. He hesitated. "Call me Rafe." Mara nodded, poking the fire. "They said I cursed my husband, that I burned him in his sleep." Rafe looked at her, long, quiet. "Did you?" Her jaw tightened. "No, but I did strike the match. I was trying to save him. The lantern fell. I pulled him out, but the roof came down." Her eyes shone, reflecting the flames. "After that, folks needed someone to blame. He'd owed half the town money, and I was still breathing." Rafe took off his hat, ran a hand through his graying hair. "I seen how towns turn when they get scared," he said. "They call it justice, but it's just fire by another name." The fire cracked, a sharp pop that made her flinch. Rafe noticed. His voice softened. "You got rope scars," he said. "They tried to hang me last winter," she whispered. "Would have done it if the river hadn't risen and washed the gallows clean away." A silence fell, not empty, but full of what both had survived. He poured her water. "You got somewhere to go?" "Only north. There's a ranch I can work at. Widow runs it." Rafe nodded. "Then north it is." When morning came, the fire was ash, and the air smelled of rain. They mounted again, following the faint trail that wound between sagebrush and bones of cattle long picked clean. By noon, vultures circled overhead, lazy black shapes against the pale sky. They passed an old hanging tree, rope still swinging in the wind. Mara's breath caught, and she reached for the scar at her neck, out of instinct. Rafe saw it. He said nothing, but he slowed his horse, riding beside her. "Wind's comin' from the west," he muttered. "Storm's chasing us." By dusk, they reached an abandoned chapel. Half the roof was gone, the cross crooked, but it was shelter. Inside, the pews were splintered, the altar cracked. Dust hung thick, glimmering in the fading light. Mara set down her things. Rafe took off the boots, her husband's boots, and stared at them for a long while. She noticed. "Why'd you buy them?" He didn't look up. "Didn't buy 'em. I took 'em so no one else would." "Why?" "Because they weren't his," he said quietly. "Those boots belonged to a man in my unit. He died near the border. Same brand mark on the sole. Crescent. We buried him with none. Guess your husband bought them off a corpse." Mara froze, her hand gripping the back of a pew. "You're saying my husband stole from the dead?" Rafe's gaze met hers, steady and sorrowful. "I'm saying the dead never keep what the living need." She sank down, shaking her head. "He wasn't a good man," she said finally. "But I loved him anyway. Ain't that the curse women carry out here?" Rafe didn't answer. He just put the boots near the firelight and muttered, "Sometimes a curse keeps you alive." Outside, thunder rolled. Rafe leaned back against the altar, eyes closing. "I'll keep watch first," he said. But Mara was already awake long after midnight, listening to the rain strike the chapel roof, her mind circling one thought, that maybe, just maybe, this stranger was the first person in years who hadn't looked at her like she was poison. And as the fire burned low, her eyes drifted to the boots, her husband's boots. And she realized something strange. They looked smaller now, as if grief had shrunk the man they once fit. The storm howled louder, and somewhere beyond the dark horizon, a torchlight flickered, too steady to be lightning. The townsmen were coming. By dawn, the rain had stopped, but the world smelled of wet ash and gun oil. Rafe woke first. He always did. The soldier in him didn't sleep past danger. Through the crack in the chapel wall, he saw them. 5 riders on the ridge, black shapes against the pale sky, torches flickering like judgment. He nudged Mara awake. "They're here," he said. She rose too fast, clutching her chest. "Who?" "Your ghosts," he muttered. "And mine too, maybe." They moved quick. Rafe saddled Juniper, handed her the small knife he kept hidden in his boot. "Don't use it unless you aim to live," he said. "I stopped aiming years ago." "Then start again," he replied. They rode north, following the dry riverbed until the chapel vanished behind them, just another ruin for crows to perch on. The posse followed slow but sure. 5 men. The preacher's son at the front, his torch cutting through the mist like vengeance itself. By midday, the sun bled through the clouds, and the desert opened wide, gold dust and wind and nothing else. Rafe slowed his horse. "We can't outrun 'em forever." "Then we hide?" Mara asked. He shook his head. "We make them wonder if we're worth catching." They came to a canyon split by a stream no wider than a wagon. Rafe found an old mine entrance in the rock, narrow, half-collapsed, smelling of rust and ghosts. "In here," he said. Inside, the dark swallowed them whole. Only the faint gleam of daylight through cracks drew thin lines across her face. Mara leaned against the wall, shivering. Rafe tore his coat in half, gave her the better piece. "Keep quiet," he said. Outside, hooves thundered. Voices shouted. "Fan out," one called. "The witch ain't far." Another laughed. Maybe she turned to smoke again, like her husband. Rafe's jaw tightened. He watched the shadows pass near the entrance, his hand on the revolver, thumb stroking the metal like a prayer. Then, silence. Minutes bled into hours. When the noise finally faded, Mara exhaled, long, trembling, like a wound letting go. "Why'd you help me?" she whispered. Rafe didn't answer right away. He took a match, struck it, and held it up between them. The light danced in his eyes, hollowed by years. "I had a wife once," he said. "They said she poisoned me when the fever came. The townsmen buried her before I woke. I came to, and she was already under the dirt. I dug her up with my hands." The flame flickered. "She was still breathing," he said. "But by the time I got her out, it was too late. Her neck was broke from the rope." The match burned down to his fingers. He didn't flinch. "Ever since then," he said softly, "I don't let mobs write the truth." Mara looked away, tears catching the dim light. "Then I suppose we're both ghosts," she said. Rafe nodded. Ghosts still ride. When night fell, the wind shifted, eastward, carrying sound. A wolf howled. Then, faintly, gunfire. Rafe stood, cocked his head. They're shooting at something. Mara's voice was a whisper. At us? No, not yet. They crept out. Down the canyon near the stream, one of the posse's horses lay on its side, dead, half buried in mud. Another man knelt beside it, his torch guttering in the wind. He looked young, too young to be hunting anyone. Rafe stepped forward, gun raised. Drop it, he ordered. The boy startled, the torch falling into the mud. I ain't after you, he cried. They left me, the preacher's son. He's gone mad. Says he'll hang her himself. Rafe's eyes hardened. Where? Old mill north of here. They think it's where the fire started. Said they'll end it where it began. Mara's breath hitched. That's my land. They rode hard through the night. Rafe's boots, her husband's boots, hit the stirrups heavy, soaked in mud and memory. Each mile took him deeper into something he didn't name. When they reached the mill, the moon hung low, silver and cruel. Smoke rose from the doorway, and inside, voices echoed, sharp and cruel. Bring her out! Let's see if she burns again! Rafe slid off his horse, handed Mara his revolver. You stay here. I'm done staying, she said, and followed him into the smoke. Inside, the preacher's son stood before a bonfire, rope in hand. The crowd, just 4 men now, watched like it was Sunday service. Rafe stepped out of the shadow. You boys look like you lost your way. The preacher's son sneered. Ain't your concern, stranger. This witch cursed our land. Rafe's voice dropped low. She cursed no one. It's your guilt you're trying to hang. The man spat. And who are you to judge? Rafe's gun cocked. Someone who's buried enough good women because cowards needed a story. A shot cracked. The world exploded in flame and echo. 1 man fell. Another fled. Rafe took a bullet to the shoulder, stumbled but didn't fall. Mara screamed his name, a sound half fury, half prayer. She ran forward, grabbed the fallen torch, and hurled it at the rope still hanging above the fire. It caught instantly, flames licking up, eating through the noose that had once nearly taken her life. The preacher's son lunged. Mara swung the knife Rafe had given her. Quick, sure. Blood hit the dirt, hot as the fire's breath. He fell without a word. When it was over, the night felt hollow. Rafe slumped against the wall, bleeding. Mara knelt beside him, pressing her hand to his wound. You shouldn't have come for me, she said. He managed a faint smile. Guess I was tired of running from ghosts. The boots, her husband's boots, lay half burned in the dirt beside them. She picked one up, turned it over, and whispered, Then let the dead finally rest. She threw them into the fire. Leather curled, cracked, turned black. The crescent brand vanished in smoke. By dawn, the mill was nothing but smoke and ruin. The wind carried the scent of charred leather, blood, and rain-soaked wood. Crows circled above the chimney stack like black prayers no one dared to say aloud. Mara sat in the mud beside Rafe, his head resting against a sack of grain gone to ash. The wound in his shoulder bled slow but deep. She'd wrapped it with the hem of her skirt, the only clean thing she had left. Neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of everything they couldn't yet name. Then, from beyond the trees, came the sound of wagon wheels. The townspeople arrived one by one. Men with rifles slung low, women with shawls drawn tight. The preacher's son's body lay stretched out in the dirt. Someone gasped. Someone else crossed themselves. The marshal rode up last, his horse uneasy, snorting at the scent of death. He dismounted slow, eyes sweeping the scene, the dead, the burned rope, the blackened boots still smoldering near the fire pit. "What happened here?" he asked. Mara stood. Her hair was tangled, her face streaked with soot, but her eyes were clear. "Justice," she said quietly. "The kind that don't wait for permission." The marshal's gaze hardened. "You killed a man, Mrs. Keene." She didn't flinch. "He was already dead. Just took him longer to lie down." The crowd murmured. A woman whispered, "She cursed him." Another said, "No, he got what was coming." And then, from the back of the crowd, an old man stepped forward. His hands trembled as he leaned on a cane, voice rough from years of dust and tobacco. "She didn't curse no one," he said. "That boy put lantern oil on her land the night of the fire. I seen him, thought I'd imagined it all these years, but I remember the smell." A hush rippled through the crowd. Mara turned, eyes wide. "Why didn't you say something?" He lowered his gaze. "Because folks don't listen when they're looking for a witch to burn. I was a coward, but not today." The marshal's jaw worked. Rafe stirred, his voice hoarse but steady. "You heard the man," he rasped. "Write that down in your fine little report." The marshal hesitated, then slowly removed his hat. "Guess the Lord can keep this one. She's free." He turned to leave, but before he could mount up, a small voice broke the silence again, the same child from the town square. "Miss Mara," the girl said, holding something out in her tiny hand. A small flat stone, smoothed by years of river water. A single daisy pressed into it. "For your garden," she whispered. "Mama says flowers don't grow in cursed soil, but I think maybe they just wait for kindness." Mara took the stone, her hands shaking. "Thank you," she said softly. When the wagons left, the sun had burned through the mist. Rafe tried to stand, but the pain pulled him back down. Mara knelt beside him. "Don't," he said. "Leave me here." "Not after all this," she answered. "You brought me out of the gallows twice, once with words, once with fire. You think I'm letting you die on dirt." He smiled faintly. "You talk like a preacher." "Never had use for one," she said. She helped him onto the horse. Juniper snorted, sensing his weight. Mara mounted behind, steadying him with both arms. As they rode away, she glanced back once, at the mill, the burned rope, the stone the child had left. The crowd watched them go, but no one followed. Not this time. For the first time in years, the town of Ash Hollow stayed quiet. Not from fear, but from shame. They stopped by the river at dusk. Mara built a small fire, Rafe's arm bound tight with fresh cloth torn from her blouse. He looked at her through the firelight, eyes softer than before. "You ever think about leaving all this behind?" he asked. She smiled, a tired, weathered smile, but real. "You can't leave what's already burned. You can only grow something in its ashes." She pulled out the stone the child had given her, set it near the fire. The daisy was wilting, but its white petals still caught the glow. The night grew colder. Coyotes howled. Rafe reached for his canteen and muttered. "If I don't make it, you will," she said. "If I don't," he repeated. Bury me where the boots burned. That way I'll know the fire ended with me." She looked at him, really looked, and nodded once. Then she fed the fire, her eyes reflecting flame and sorrow and something harder to name: endurance. In the distance, thunder rolled again, but this time it sounded like rain coming home, not a storm. The night pressed close, and Mara whispered a prayer she didn't know she still remembered. May the ground forget what the fire taught it. She glanced at the stone, at the daisy, and something in her chest, long sealed and silent, broke open. The wind shifted, warm now, carrying the scent of sage and promise. Spring came late to Ash Hollow that year. The rains arrived in shy, reluctant bursts, as if the heavens themselves weren't sure whether the land deserved cleansing. But the river rose anyway, slow and brown, curling through the valley that once held the mill, carrying soot, bones, and the last pieces of the past away. Mara Keene stayed. She bought back her husband's land with the little she'd saved and the rest that the townsfolk quietly offered. Not from guilt alone, but from something else, something heavier. The townspeople still watched her, still whispered sometimes, but their words no longer carried fire. The preacher's church stood empty now, the sun buried in unmarked ground, and each Sunday morning it was Mara's land that drew the curious. For there, where the ashes had fallen thick and black, wildflowers had begun to grow. She built no house at first, only a small shack by the river. The soil was hard, stubborn. She broke it with a shovel, older than her faith. Each turn of the dirt was a heartbeat, a memory, a reckoning. Some nights, Rafe would ride down from the hills. His shoulder had healed crooked, but he could still manage a horse. He helped her plant the first rows: corn, beans, marigolds. He never stayed long, just enough to mend a fence, fix a wheel, share a silence. Once he said, "You're fighting the ground like it owes you." She paused, sweat running down her neck. "It does." He smiled faintly. "Then make it pay in flowers." One morning, she woke to find a single boot half buried by the garden gate. It was hers now, not her husband's, but one of the pair Rafe had worn since that night at the mill. The left boot, the leather cracked, the crescent brand burned clean away. Inside, tucked in the toe, was a folded scrap of paper. In a rough hand, it read, "Went north. Might never come back. Keep this to remember what fits the living, not the dead." She stared at the note until the ink blurred from her tears. Then she set the boot upright by the gate, filled it with soil, and planted a seed. Your seasons shifted like old cards being shuffled. By autumn, vines had climbed the fence. The boot bloomed, a white daisy at first, then more, spreading outward like forgiveness that didn't need permission. Children from the town came to see it. They called it the widow's garden, though by then Mara wasn't a widow in spirit anymore. She was something else, a woman who had stayed alive long enough to stop apologizing for it. The same child who'd once handed her a river stone returned, now taller, shy smile, and dirt on her hands. "Miss Mara," she said, "Mama says you made the cursed ground holy." Mara wiped her hands on her apron and smiled. "No, child. The ground just learned it was never cursed. It was just waiting for someone to stay." That night, as the last light faded over the plains, She sat on the porch of her shack. The garden shimmered in the dusk, dew gathering on the petals, each one catching a glint of the fading sun. She traced the small scar at her neck, the place the rope had once burned, and whispered, "I'm still here." The wind answered softly through the marigolds. In it, she almost thought she heard his voice. Rafe's low drawl, fading and tender. "Still fits, don't it?" She smiled, eyes closing, the faint scent of soil and rain filling her chest. Years later, travelers passing through Ash Hollow would sometimes stop by the old garden. The land had changed, fences mended, the soil rich again. But one thing remained untouched, the boot by the gate. It was cracked, faded, half swallowed by vines. But every spring, daisies still bloomed from its hollow, white and stubborn, like light pushing through memory. The locals said it grew without tending, that it didn't need rain or seed anymore, that the land itself remembered her. By then, Marakeen was long gone. Some said she moved north to join Rafe. Others whispered she died one winter night with her hands still in the soil. No one was sure. But what everyone knew was this: no one ever called her witch again. They called her the woman who made the fire bloom. On warm evenings, when the wind slid low through the canyon, the children would gather by the riverbank, and the old folks would tell the story. Not loud, not like a sermon, but soft, as though it might break if spoken too hard. They'd start it the same way every time. She was selling her husband's boots when the stranger walked in, a man who carried more ghosts than gunpowder. And the story would unfold in that rhythm of truth and dust, about the fire that didn't kill her, about the rope that burned but didn't break her neck, about the cowboy who said they still fit, and how those words turned from grief into a promise. Children would listen wide-eyed, picturing her standing there in the square, ash in her hair, dirt on her hands, still proud enough to face a crowd that wanted her gone. Sometimes someone would ask, was she really innocent? And the teller, usually some old rancher with tobacco breath, and eyes that still remembered the way fire glows on a guilty face, would answer, "Does it matter? The ones who live honest don't always live clean." But she stayed, and that's more than most. And they'd all fall quiet for a while, listening to the wind through the grass. A generation later, a preacher rebuilt his chapel near the same ground. He left one corner of the property untouched, the little patch with the boot and the daisies. When asked why, he'd smile and say, "Because some prayers grow best in the ashes." And if you walked through Ash Hollow at sunset, when the sky turned to burning copper, you might hear it, a low whisper in the wind, just beneath the hum of the crickets and the river's sigh. Still fits, don't it? No one knows if it's Rafe's voice or the sound of her laughter echoing through time. But the folks say it makes the flowers bow and the soil breathe deeper, as if the land itself remembers that once, long ago, mercy rode through fire and didn't turn back. So if ever you find yourself standing in the ruins of something you loved, don't hurry to curse the ashes. Wait, listen. There might be life still hiding there, quiet, small, patient, waiting for you to stay long enough to see it bloom. Because sometimes, in the wild places where justice fails, and rumor reigns. The truest miracle isn't innocence. It's survival, and the courage to plant flowers on the very ground that tried to bury you.